Hi everyone, just checking if all of you are able to hear me. So it will be great if people can confirm in the chat window. So I am checking the YouTube live chat now and welcome all of you first of all to this particular analysis session. I hope everybody is able to hear me clearly and you can also see my screen. Okay, I can see some comments. Hi everybody and welcome to the session. So we'll get started in a minute. So I'm just waiting for the confirmation as well that all of you are able to hear me. Okay. So I hope people who have joined have either taken the test or those of you who have joined maybe are planning to take it or have it either tomorrow or day after tomorrow. So just let me wait for the setup to be proper and then we'll get started. I hope everybody is able to hear me. So I can see Mahesh who has said that I hope that is the case for everybody. Okay, great. So I think we can start now. So it's going to be a very quick analysis. So I won't be taking a lot of time and I will try and take any questions that you guys have. So this is day one analysis and CET 22, if you look at it. So last year, for example, we had it over 3 days and there was a morning slot and there was an afternoon slot. But this year, what happened was, I think the morning slot didn't happen. There were some rumors that there were some students who had got that as the slot, but there was no report whatsoever when it came to slot one, which means that there was no morning slot. That's the thing that we have to conclude maybe based on it. And the slot two, which was essentially the afternoon slot, that is the slot one. So this year, it seems that CET is getting conducted over 5 slots. So on day one, there's only one slot, which was afternoon, which was conducted from 2 to 4:30, right? So what we are going to do is we're going to analyze this particular paper. So 2 to 4:30 the section. So I think some of you are finding the audio to be low. Just see if you can increase it at your end because at my end, I'm trying to speak as loudly as I can. So I hope that it is fine for everybody now. Okay, so let's get started with the analysis. Yeah. So the first thing that we need to understand is that there was no major surprise this time, right? The test had no sectional breakup. The pattern was exactly that of CET 21. So the last year was a change that they introduced. So till last year, the paper used to be a sectional test, but now since last year, it has become a jumbled paper. Okay, I can see a lot of you are still facing that sound issue. So let me see if I can fix it. Just give me a moment. I hope the audio is a little better now. It will be great if people who were having that audio issue can confirm. And in the meanwhile, I'll just continue to talk about the paper, right? So the test had no sectional breakup, right? And the pattern was that of last year's CET. So all 200 questions appear in a jumbled manner. So everybody this year was sort of waiting whether it was going to be a jumbled paper or a sectional paper. And now finally they gave it as a jumbled test, right? There was no negative marking for incorrect answers as usual, as it has been the case with CET. And the test was easy. So we spoke to a lot of students. We have some of our best mentors taking the test. And the feedback that we have got was that the overall test was easy and students could have attempted a lot of questions in this paper. Some even came back and said that they have attempted 160, 170, 180 questions and so on. So the test was easy, but of course, it's very difficult to predict the cutoffs at this point of time. Sometimes it also happens that people tend to overestimate the difficulty or underestimate it, right? So generally, the first instinct that people have about a difficulty may or may not be correct. And that is why you have to wait for some time, wait for more people to take it. Only after the day 2 and day 3 gets over, we'll be able to talk overall about what the difficulty was. Because last year, what happened was across the slots, they didn't follow the same difficulty. And that is why whatever we are talking about today is for this particular slot. It may or may not continue tomorrow and day after. Now, the area wise, of course, it was a very good thing. So I was pretty happy to see that they have tried to be very close to the distribution that is usually followed on the CET. So quantitative aptitude, we were able to get 45 questions in this particular section. So we actually counted and we realized that there are 45 questions there. In logical reasoning, close to 80, and this includes the 6 questions of syllogisms which were there. So if you look at the core logical reasoning plus the verbal reasoning, which is syllogisms, that made up total of 80 questions. VRC was exactly 50 questions and abstract reasoning was exactly 25. Now there could be plus or minus 1 here and there in terms of counting, etc. But that is not going to make a lot of difference in terms of your approach towards the paper. It was found that each of these sections, each of these areas, I won't call it sections because it was not sectionally divided. So each of the areas can be categorized as easy, and that is why the overall paper was also found to be pretty easy. So now let's talk about each of the areas. So we'll start with the quantitative ability and data interpretation section. So there was a surprise, of course, in the form of a lot of DS questions. Now, typically on the CET, you would not have too many DS questions, data sufficiency questions. But this time, the report was that there were a lot of DS questions. If you look at arithmetic, for example, there were 13 direct questions of arithmetic, which is your percentage, profit loss, SICI, time, speed, distance, and so on. And 13 questions from that, but there were 8 questions on data sufficiency related to arithmetic. So you would not only have a direct profit and loss question, but you would also be tested on it in terms of a data sufficiency question. Algebra, there were 3 direct questions plus 3 questions on data sufficiency. There were no quantitative comparison questions this time. In geometry, 2 direct questions plus 5 questions on data sufficiency. And there were 2 questions on probability, which were again categorized as easy. And in terms of data interpretation, there were total only 8 questions. So for a lot of you who don't like DI, maybe that's a good news. But the increase in the DS questions could have become a problem for a few students, because DS questions, some of them had 3 statements, some of them had 4 statements. And that is why data sufficiency part of it was a little challenging. So some of the students might have found the overall quantitative area to be slightly maybe moderate, not directly easy, simply because of the DS questions, because you had 3 sentence DS and 4 sentence DS. In terms of data interpretation, as I said, only 8 questions were there. There was 1 line chart with 5 questions on it, and there was 1 table with 3 questions on it. So this comes out to be total 44, but as I said, plus or minus 1 here and there can always happen in terms of counting. You can consider it to be 44 to 45 questions in quant and data interpretation. Okay. Now, in terms of logical reasoning, so LR, again, they tried to stick to the number that they typically used to have on CET. So non-verbal reasoning was 75 questions. And verbal reasoning we have added here, which is syllogism. So that was 6 questions, and there were 3 statements followed by 4 conclusions. So 75 plus 6, again, you can do a plus minus 1 here and say that around 80 questions came from the logical reasoning area. So non-verbal reasoning, you had questions on linear arrangement, family tree, directions, matrix arrangement, circular arrangement, number series, and selection criteria. I'll give you the number of questions that appeared from each of these areas. And there was a problem, of course, with respect to LR caselets, was that in some of them, the questions were not linearly presented. So they were not together. So for example, there is a set which is on linear arrangement. Maybe the first question of it is question number 5, but the second question of it is not question number 6, but let's say a question number 17. The third question is spread somewhere in the paper at maybe, let's say, a question number 70. So there were some sets wherein the questions were not presented together. There were some sets where it was presented together. And that is why a simple advice in this case would be to do your rough work well, so that even if there is a question which is scattered somewhere, you can go back to your rough work and quickly answer that question, right? So that is why don't get scared if you see that on a set there is only one question. Maybe there are other questions, but they are somewhere else in the paper, okay? Because the paper is jumbled. There were some sets wherein all the questions appeared together, but there were some sets where the questions were scattered throughout the paper. So just be a little careful here. Make sure that your rough work is proper so that you can come back to it, okay? But don't get scared. I mean, don't get worried that, okay, I have solved so much, but there's only one question on it, right? Syllogisms, as I said, there were 6 questions on this, fairly simple direct questions. Now let's talk about the breakup of LR. So we start with the linear arrangement. There were 11 standalone questions on linear arrangements, plus there was a set of 4 questions. Then family tree, you had 7 questions related to this. Coding, decoding, 6 standalone questions plus a set of 5, so 11 questions in total. In terms of directions, I was surprised to see that there were 12 questions based on directions. For matrix arrangement, which is like a very standard thing in CET, 7 standalone plus 2 sets of 5 questions each. So that's 17 questions in total on matrix arrangement. Circular arrangement, 3 questions, number series 7, and selection criteria, which sort of made a comeback because you typically don't see selection criteria every single year. Sometimes it is there, sometimes it is not there. So there were 4 questions on selection criteria. The overall difficulty of LR again is categorized as easy simply because the questions were direct. So though you might see that there are a lot of questions on a particular thing, the questions were more or less direct, because of which people were able to crack it. So this was not like a very difficult CET wherein you would have intense amount of effort to be taken to crack a particular set. Okay. A lot of you have been asking, what about tomorrow's paper? Nobody can predict that, right? So even last year, day one, the data that we had or the number of questions that we had, day two had different number of questions. The only good thing is, let's say if they continue to have a similar format and similar difficulty level, at least it will bring some parity into what the final score or percentile is for students. So we can just hope that they continue to have equal distribution at least. So 75 questions of LR and 45 questions of quant, 50 questions of VA, and so on. As long as they keep that distribution also, it will be a very good thing, and very good thing for students, I would say. Okay. Now, when it comes to abstract reasoning, 25 questions. So here you can categorize it as easy to moderate, because some questions were direct, some questions required some level of thinking. 8 questions on analogy, where the figures are given, 2 figures are given, or 3 figures are given, and you have to find the analogy. In series, there are 15 questions. So what is the next term in next image in the series, or what is the missing image in the series? And then there were 2 questions on odd image out. Okay, so not too many different question types. So nothing related to paper cutting and folding, or nothing related to counting how many triangles are there in this, or how many rectangles are there in this. So nothing of that sort. Very classic abstract reasoning questions, only focusing on analogy, series, and odd one out, right? So total 25 questions. And let's now talk about the last thing, which is verbal ability and reading comprehension. So on the left-hand side, you will see the broad breakup. 50 questions total. RC questions, there were 27 in total. There were 6 RC passages. So when it comes to RC, the typical length was found to be varying. So there were some RCs where the length was 300 plus words and so on. There were some which were shorter in length. Okay, so now don't get scared because of the number of RCs that you see 6 RCs. I'm also going to give you the topics through which these RCs appeared. So there was a short paragraph from The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. There was a passage on civilization and machines. There was a passage on a father's advice to his son on how to behave with others. There was a passage on economic crisis in India post-independence. There was a passage on sarcasm as a form of communication. And lastly, there was a passage on common cold. So the topics were very different, but it was pretty straightforward to read. So the reading part of it and the comprehension part of it was not difficult. And that is why don't get worried because of the 6 RC number that you see. They were pretty straightforward to read. And then there were 23 questions on vocabulary and grammar together. Now, I will also give you the split of these 23 questions. So you can see that for fill in the blank, there were 4 questions on this with a single blank in it. 4 questions on replacing the underlined word in a passage, and there was a single passage there. Jumbled paragraph questions, so parajumble questions were there, and there were 4 questions based on this, 5 sentences in each of them. Odd sentence, you had 5 sentences, you had to identify which of them is the odd, and there were 4 questions based on it, and 5 direct questions on synonyms and 2 direct questions on antonyms. So that composed your total the VA part of it, which is 23 questions and 27 questions on the reading comprehension. Again, as I said, pretty straightforward section. You didn't have any complexity, so to say. And if you're somebody who is good at verbal, you would have really enjoyed this sort of a paper. So this is the overall analysis that we had for this particular slot. Of course, we have a live session tomorrow as well in the evening
about day 2 analysis, and then after day 3 we are going to give a final outcome on what the entire thing was across the 5 slots that are happening for CET. The overall take, the cutoff prediction, all of it will happen later. For now, we'll just say that this particular paper stayed true to the classic CET, which is there in terms of the number of questions. There is no reason for students to panic or worry about whatever. There are reports that some students have attempted 185, 190 questions and so on. I would only say that don't worry so much about it, right? So if the paper was easy, it was easy for everybody. And it will, of course, reflect in the final outcome. What I've also observed over the years is, because even last year this had happened, and a lot of you would not have seen last year paper. And what happened was people came out of the test in different slots and said that the paper was very easy. I've attempted 175 genuine, 180 genuine, 190 genuine, and so on. Ultimately, when the scores came out, you saw that the topper was at 165, right? So a lot of times people tend to overestimate also their own ability or performance on that day, or they try to underestimate, right? So things can always be here and there. That is why I take everything that you hear with a little bit of pinch of salt, I would say. Don't go by the things that you have heard that people have attempted 190 genuinely. A lot of questions would also go wrong because, of course, you are in that zone, and you, as part of going fast, you end up making a few errors at least. So initial impression, easy paper. People can definitely go above, say, 150, 160 attempts in this case, genuine attempts that too. And if you have very good accuracy, of course, you're also going to get a good score, right? Some questions that I'm going to take from the chat. So there's a question from Samruddhi, what about tomorrow's paper? As I said, right, nobody can predict it. Last year we had different distribution across slots. We can just hope that they don't do it this time and try to stay very close to this sort of a distribution so that it's fair for students. Aditi is asking, there's no difference, there's no lot of difference between slots, right? So typically you would expect not to happen, but then with respect to CET, it has happened in the past where one particular slot was easy or the other one was difficult. For example, last year, I think day 1 slot 2 was found to be easiest, and a lot of people sort of had difficulty in some other slots. So there's nothing that can be generalized here. I just want everybody to look at the review for what it is, that okay, this is the data that is there. Does not mean that paper tomorrow or day after are going to be exactly similar. You may have some surprises, you may not have some surprises. So don't lose the momentum or your mind thinking about these things. Whatever prep that you have done so far, right, that is always going to help you. So no matter how the paper is, I think you should just give your best, and let's see what happens from there. Vocab difficulty level, again, pretty straightforward questions in vocab. So see, vocab, the problem is one person might find it easy, the other person might find it difficult, right? That's the problem. So whether you know a word or you don't know a word, it is going to decide that. So that's why it cannot really be generalized, but at least the RCs were pretty straightforward to read. So I think anybody could have attempted all of the RCs. Should I take a mock today evening if I have a paper tomorrow morning? I don't think so. I think it's better to simply relax, maybe do a little bit of revision or formula revision and all those things. Have good meal and make sure that you sleep enough if you have paper tomorrow. There's no point taking a mock at this point of time. Okay. There's a question from Raj. Do they mention how many questions will be there if LR questions of a particular set are jumbled here and there? No, Raj, that was not mentioned. So as I said, there were some sets where the questions appeared together, and there were some sets where questions appeared scattered. Okay. Deep is asking whether critical reasoning was there. There was no critical reasoning, so no questions on assumptions, inference, argument, and so on, strengthening, weakening argument, etc. None of it was there. So no critical reasoning this time in the paper. Tejas is asking, can we predict JBMS cutoff? See, it is a little difficult to say at this point of time, because generally what happens is students come out of the test, and if they have been able to do better than their, say, mock test performance, they will immediately say that the test was easy. But then you typically would not have very high increase in your accuracy, even if the paper is easy. So that is why we cannot really say based on just the few reports that we have heard so far. But let's say if the paper is very easy, it can definitely go above 150 also, because it has happened in the past. So earlier there have been instances where JB cutoff has gone to 152 or 153 and so on. So it can definitely go up, but where it will go, nobody knows at this point of time, at least. Saurabh is asking whether there's normalization or not. At least last year, I don't think there was any normalization. I had written a blog post also on it. So those of you who are not subscribed, we have a blog called Cracking CET. I suggest that all of you subscribe to it because we have a lot of content there that is useful, even for later admission process and so on. So I written a post on it that it didn't seem that they had done any sort of normalization. Though I know that a lot of you will say that on the website it is given that there is equipercentile method and so on. We have enough reason to believe that they don't really do any of it. And I don't think there is any sort of normalization. And that is why the only thing that I'll possibly pray for is if they continue to maintain similar difficulty and distribution across the remaining slots that are there. Okay. Is there a way we can anticipate which question groups will be jumbled? Definitely can't. You won't be able to figure that out. Karthik has asked, parajumbles was a single question. So parajumbles, the report is that you had a total of 4 questions based on this. Okay, so there was a single set, 5 statements were given and 4 questions appeared on it. Avni is asking, were more than 2 statements given for each DS questions? Yes. So as I said in the beginning as well, when it comes to DS, there were some DS questions with 3 statements on it, and there were some DS questions with 4 statements on it. And that is why a lot of people found the DS part of it difficult, simply because you're not used to solving a lot of DS questions or seeing a lot of DS questions on CET. And this time, of course, because you had so many DS questions, it came up as a challenge for a lot of students. So I would suggest that definitely practice a little bit of DS in case you haven't, considering the number of questions that we saw this time. 3 statement DS and 4 statement DS. Okay, any more questions? Otherwise, we have all these events lined up for you. So we discuss the day 1 analysis. Tomorrow we'll have day 2 analysis. And then finally, we'll give a final verdict on how the CET went overall this year and what could be the cutoff. So all of that will happen later. I hope this thing has helped you guys and have given you an overview of what happened. In case you have any questions, feel free to put a comment on this particular video once it goes on YouTube, and we'll be very happy to answer your queries. Okay. So thank you so much for joining. If there are no more questions, then we can wrap it up here. Wish all of you all the best. So those of you who have taken it, of course, wish you all the best for the results. But those of you who are going to take it tomorrow and day after, wish you the best. I hope whatever we have done in the last 1 year has helped you get ready for this day. And I hope you will come out of it with flying colors. So thank you so much and wish all of you all the best once again. I hope to see you guys in the next session that we'll do in terms of analysis. Thanks for joining. Bye, everyone.